Hello and welcome to today's webinar held by VitaFlow Australia. We are lucky enough to have Camille Newby, lead paediatric dietitian in IMD at Bristol Royal Hospital for Children in the UK, presenting on low weaning practices for amino acid restricted diets. Camille qualified as a dietitian in 2004 with a bachelor's in nutritional science from McGill University in Montreal, Canada. She started work as a dietitian at the Bristol Royal Infirmary in 2006 as a general adult dietitian in the UK. In 2007, she had the opportunity to start her career in the paediatric dietetics at the Bristol Royal Hospital for Children and continues to work there. Whilst at the BRHC, Camille has been working in areas of inherited metabolic disease and ketogenic diet. In 2014, Camille obtained her master's in paediatric dietetics from the University of Plymouth, concentrating on ketogenic diet and inherited metabolic disease. In January 2015, Camille was appointed as the Southwest Regional Dietetic Lead for Inherited Metabolic Diseases. Camille presents nationally and internationally, teaches on Module 4 of the Masters in Paediatric Dietetics at Plymouth University, and she's also the advisor dietitian for PDHD charity, the Freya Foundation.
Thank you, Ryan, for that introduction. Today, I will be talking to you about my practice of low-protein weaning diets. I will be going over the aims of dietary management, weaning, in talking about the introduction of the second stage protein substitute, and briefly touch on growth and body composition. First, I'll talk to you about the aims of dietary management. The principles of weaning onto a solid foods are the same for the conditions of PKU, homocystinuria, maple syrup urine disease, and tyrosinemia type 1. I'd also like to note that the articles I reference in this talk are based on PKU patients, but I feel the results can be applied to these other conditions. The aims of dietary management are to achieve normal growth potential. We do this by providing protein requirements of 3 grams per kilogram for up to the age of 2 years, and to provide adequate energy for growth. We aim to prevent dietary deficiencies by supplementing vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids, and aim to maintain good metabolic control. So for example, in our PKU patient population, we aim to maintain phenylalanine levels of 120 to 360 micromillimoles per liter. Next, I'll speak to you about weaning. Weaning is the process of gradually introducing an infant to what will be its adult's diet while withdrawing the supply of breast milk of infant formula. The infant is considered to be fully weaned once it is no longer fed any breast milk or formula. Weaning is a vital stage in an infant's development. It is a time when they should be introduced to a wide variety of flavors and textures. It helps set future feeding patterns and food preferences. Mismanagement of the weaning process may have detrimental effects on feeding development and future food choices. With infants that are being treated with a low-protein diet or an amino acid restricted diet, there is a strong focus on food as part of their treatment, and feeding is very much controlled and monitored by healthcare professionals. It is not surprising that weaning can be a very stressful time for parents and caregivers. When should weaning start? According to the World Health Organization, around the age of 6 months, an infant's need for energy and nutrients starts to exceed what is provided by breast milk or infant formula, and complementary foods are necessary to meet those needs. The ESPGHAN also state that complementary foods, such as solids and liquids, other than breast milk or infant formula, should not be introduced before the age of 4 months, but should not be delayed beyond 6 months. An infant of this age is also developmentally ready for other foods. If complementary foods are not introduced around the age of 6 months, or if they are given inappropriately, an infant's growth may falter. Signs that we should be looking for the readiness of weaning. So, is the infant able to sit with support? Do they have good head control? Have they started putting objects towards their mouth? And have they started watching others in their family with interest while they're eating? I think with low-protein diets, there are additional considerations we need to have for when we start weaning these patients. We have to consider that we are measuring exchange foods. So we're introducing the exchange system of measuring protein foods to the family. We also need to make sure that we spend time encouraging the patients and the family to use low-protein foods, and not just natural low-protein foods, but foods that are available on prescription. And then we have the introduction of the second stage protein substitute to consider. Now I'll just take you through the weaning process. So I break it down into stages. Stage 1. So we try and introduce solid foods around 17 to 26 weeks. Introducing solid foods before the WHO recommendation age of 6 months may be beneficial in these patients, as the neophobic response to food is less persistent, which could possibly lead to better acceptance of foods naturally low in protein. In a recent article by Alex Pinto et al., where the weaning practices of PKU were looked at across Europe, it was reported that 85% of healthcare professionals recommended weaning infants with PKU between 17 to 26 weeks of age. In my practice, weaning tends to start around the age of 20 to 22 weeks, and it is always a decision made as a joint discussion with parents and caregivers. We tend to start with giving 1 to 2 teaspoons of naturally low protein foods, such as puree apple, pear, carrot, butternut squash, or if parents don't want to prepare their own foods, they can use commercial baby food jars as long as they provide less than 0.5 grams of protein per 100 grams. And we encourage families to use a wide variety of flavors. The low protein food should be offered after the breast or bottle feed and the precursor infant formula. As babies are learning to eat, it is important to start with naturally low protein foods, as these can be given without restriction or the need to count protein. Here's a slide of just some of the first weaning foods that we tend to advise our parents to use. So we have, as you can see, peaches, strawberries, apples, pears. Vegetable purees can be butternut squash, carrot, swede, and sweet potato. We do start the introduction of higher energy, low protein weaning foods. We give out recipes of for making homemade low protein rusks. We can use the products by Promin for hot breakfast cereal. So it's just a version of an oatmeal or a porridge. And low protein pasta meal, which is similar to the similar consistency made up to baby rice that can be used to complement meals and add in extra energy for when you're just using fruit and vegetable purees. Now I'd like to spend some time talking about the second stage protein substitute. As solids are introduced, the infant may not be able to drink enough of the precursor-free amino acid formula to meet their total protein requirements of 3 grams per kilogram. At this stage, it will become necessary to introduce a more concentrated protein substitute. As you can see on this slide here, I have put up a variety of different examples of second stage protein substitutes. We have by VitaFlow the Explore range, and also by Nutricia there is the Animix First Spoon and Animix Junior. In the article Weaning Practices in Phenylketonuria Varying Between Health Professionals in Europe, it was found that the type of second stage protein substitute varied across Europe. In my center, I recommend giving the second stage protein substitute as a paste or a gel instead of a concentrated drink. This compares to 53% of healthcare professionals in the study by Alex Pinto, whereas 53% gave semi-solid as a second stage protein substitute, 18% use a concentrated drink as a second stage protein substitute, 19% use a non-concentrated drink, and 11% of the centers did not answer the question. In the same article, it was found that the timing of the introduction of the second stage protein substitute varied across Europe. You can see here that under the age of 26 weeks, only 9% of the centers were encouraging the start of the second stage protein substitute. 41% introduced it between the age of 26 to 36 weeks. Between the age of 37 to 52 weeks, 13%, and then over the age of 1, 37% of centers introduced the second stage protein substitute. In my practice, we often aim to start the second stage protein substitute between 22 to 24 weeks of age, and it is found to be well tolerated by the patients. This is similar to the findings of Evan et al.'s retrospective study on 15 years of using a second stage protein substitute for weaning in PKU, where they reported that a semi-solid second stage protein substitute given from 20 weeks is well tolerated, and any feeding issues encountered were comparable to the problem seen in children without PKU. When introducing the second stage protein substitute, I always recommend to give it as a paste before meals to ensure that it is eaten. As it is hyperosmolar, it should always be given with extra fluid. They should be cautiously introduced as their effect on the stool frequency and consistency. They should always be cautiously introduced and their effect on stool frequency and consistency closely monitored due to the risk of constipation and diarrhea. So we gradually increase the amount given as the amount of the precursor infant formula decreases. We aim to stop the precursor-free infant formula by the age of 1 year. And then we introduce or have started to already introduce low protein milk such as Pro Zero and Snow Pro as a milk drink. This slide is to show you a visual representation of calculating the amount of protein requirements for an infant as they are growing, looking at if the amount of natural protein that they're having, once they're weaning and over 6 months, keeping their precursor-free infant formula to 600 mils, and then increasing the second stage protein substitute to meet their protein requirements as they grow. Now, one thing as a metabolic dietitian that we probably have all encountered is the refusal of the second stage protein substitute. Factors that may influence the acceptance of the second stage protein substitute can be teething and childhood illness. Retrospective data suggests that retrospective data by Evans et al. In their 15-year study of using a second stage protein substitute demonstrated that there were other factors that can affect the refusal of the second stage protein substitute, one of them being early weaning, so if the child is weaned before the age of 17 weeks. Another one can be starting the second stage protein substitute after the age of 26 weeks. And also if there is a delayed introduction of textured foods. It is important to note that generally, the refusal of the second stage protein substitute is associated with normal weaning behavior commonly occurring alongside food refusal during times of illness and teething. In the article, How Does Feeding Development and Progression onto Solid Foods in PKU Compare with Non-PKU Children During Weaning, they looked at feeding behaviors. Negative feeding behaviors toward the second stage protein substitute have been reported to be worse from the age 9 to 18 months. These negative behaviors are closing the mouth, turning the head away, pushing the spoon away, crying, spitting out, and flat out refusing to take it. This time period coincides with teething, but it also is around the time that the neophobic response starts. And it also coincides with an increase in childhood illnesses such as ear infections and colds. In this study by Evans et al., they reported that maternal anxiety and stress around feeding is the highest around the age of 12 to 18 months, coinciding with raised Phe levels that are most likely due to teething, illness, and increasing independence of the toddler, so them wanting to feed themselves. It is important for us to be aware of this time, as families may need increased support in the form of home visits or extra clinical reviews. I'd like to take a moment to read to you one of my patient's mother's experience. She was willing to write for me of how she felt during the times of weaning and introducing the second stage protein substitute. Weaning was a very scary time for us. I think we were very scared of giving food to our girl to begin with, as we were still trying to understand PKU and what it meant. Also, a new first-time mom, I didn't really have a clue where to start. We started to give fruit and vegetable purees to begin with. We started very slowly, and gradually we found the things she liked, such as mango, strawberries, and bananas. As she got older and was able to eat more, we added in an exchange. I got the hang of working out exchanges and weighing pretty quickly. You have no choice. I searched for low protein recipes. I am no chef, but I try my best. I found most of the food I make gets thrown on the floor, and she eats the same things every day, but I always make sure I try her with lots of different recipes. It is very disheartening when you have made something and it gets thrown on the floor, but we have to keep trying. The introduction of the supplements was very stressful. We struggle and always have struggled to get her to take her supplements. It is extremely stressful because we know how important it is and there is no choice, so she has to have it. But how do you explain that to an 18-month-old? We try to make it fun, we stay calm, and we praise her during and after. I think from that you can hear that how stressful and anxious a time it can be, but it is important that we're there to support these moms and acknowledge this as a stressful time, but we are there to help them. So some tips that we can give for introducing the second stage protein substitute. Make sure that you introduce it at the right developmental age. Make sure that we build up the intake gradually. Always try and give at the start of a meal so that they're not full from food already. It is important to be consistent. Give it at the same time, if you can, the same person. So if they're not able to be at home with the parents giving it, that it's the same nursery worker or childminder giving it, and that it is prepared and given in the same way. It's important to always always give the signal to the child that you have to finish the protein substitute. It is like a medication, they have to take it. It is important to persist with it during illness and teething as much as possible. So we have to be there to try and support parents through the stressful time. Stage 2. At this point, we introduce the exchange system. So once the child has gradually increased to 3 meals per day that are exchange-free, we aim to start introducing a natural protein source other than breast milk or formula. In the article, Weaning Practices in PKU Vary Between Healthcare Professionals Across Europe by Alex Pinto et al., it was reported that 51% of participants introduced natural protein in the form of solids between 17 to 26 weeks of age, and 48% after 26 weeks. From my own personal practice, natural protein from solids is usually introduced after 26 weeks of age when they are consistently eating good amounts of solids. Once the infant is taking about 10 teaspoons per meal of natural protein will be introduced. The equivalent of once we start introducing that, we reduce the equivalent amount of infant formula or breast milk. I usually start by introducing 0.5 to 1 gram exchange of natural protein from food. This slide just goes over the different exchanges that there are for different conditions such as PKU, homocystinuria, MSUD, and tyrosinemia type 1. Just looking at the difference amounts. So with PKU, our exchange system, we work with 50 milligrams of phenylalanine or 1 gram of protein. In tyrosinemia type 1, 1 gram of protein for an exchange. In homocystinuria, we look at methionine, so 20 milligrams of methionine or 1 gram of protein. And in maple syrup urine disease, we use 50 milligrams of leucine or 0.5 gram of protein. Some of the first exchange foods I advise to use can be potato, peas, broccoli, ordinary rusks, baby rice, porridge, Weetabix over the age of 26 weeks, or vegetable-based weaning jars. Stage 3 of weaning, it is important to start progressing with textures. So it's important to introduce at the age of 7 months finger foods. So we can use low protein toast, low protein breadsticks, low protein rusks, low protein pasta pieces, soft fruit and vegetable sticks, and fingers of low protein cheese. As they get older, it's important to continue progressing with the textures. And by 9 months, introducing pasta dishes, sandwiches made with low protein bread and a low protein filling, chopped up low protein burger and sausage pieces, introducing exchange finger foods such as potato wedges, rice cakes, and store-bought breadsticks. In this slide here, I'm showing you some pictures of one of my patient's mothers took. She has a little girl who has homocystinuria, and she's taken upon it herself to develop an Instagram account where she supports other families that are following a low protein diet. In the first picture, in the unicorn dish, you can see here that she's having some coconut yogurt with raspberry fruit puree, blueberries, and banana and raspberry. In the second dish with the elephant head, that is a low protein flour blueberry muffin with avocado and coconut yogurt. And in the last picture, that's a low protein pasta with a tomato sauce and Via Life cheese, which is a low protein cheese available in the UK. She gets a lot of good responses on Instagram, and I think it's lovely to be able to see that you can make low protein food look so beautiful. I want to use this slide just to summarize what we have been talking about and how weaning is affected by different aspects. You have the infant and their feeding ability, if they're going through neophobia, and their foods and dislikes. You have the management of the infant's condition, so the exchange system they're following, the introduction of the second stage protein substitute, and the abnormal feeding on focus that goes along with that. And then their social and environment that the child is in, so the family's routine and food preferences, their ability to cope and understand the condition, and their parenting skills. All of these come together to affect the weaning process. So the family's understanding of the weaning process, is the child going through any illnesses, such as or teething, and then the family's interaction with that child during meal times. All of these things come together and will affect the process of weaning. So it's not just, you can't just focus on one thing. We have to consider everything when we are helping these families through this time. Next, I want to move on to talking about growth and body composition. It is recommended in general feeding practice that after the age of 6 months, formula should be limited to 600 mils per day to promote intake of solid foods. To be able to keep meeting the protein requirements of 3 grams per kilogram per day, it would mean maintaining a high volume intake of precursor-free infant formula, which may decrease the intake of solid foods and interfere with weaning. There is concern during introduction of a second stage protein substitute that a child may experience a decrease in energy intake, which may impact on their growth. As you can see from the table, for every 2 grams of protein from the precursor-free infant formula, which is provided from 100 mils. Once this is replaced by a second stage protein substitute of this providing the same amount of protein equivalent, there is a reduction of about 50 calories. From my own practice, I have not experienced any faltering growth within my patient population managed on this type of restricted diet. This is most likely due to the increase in low protein solid foods and low protein milk drink intake at this time. There have been previous reports in the early 2000s of poor linear growth in patients with PKU. In this longitudinal prospective study of 20 children with PKU study by Evans et al. In 2019, they found that there was no significant difference between a PKU group and a control group for mean Z scores for weight, head circumference, or body mass index. There was a trend for slightly larger Z scores for length, therefore slightly lower BMIs, but this was not significant. They report that there is no evidence of poor growth in children with PKU that used a second stage protein substitute. In the same study, they found that the energy distribution of diets of children with PKU were slightly different compared to the control group. So in the PKU group, they had an increased intake of carbohydrate, 60%, which was providing 60% of their total energy, compared to 57% for the control group. They had a lower fat intake at 25% of their total energy, and the control group had 38% fat intake. The PKU groups, their energy from protein was maintained about 15% of their total energy, whereas the protein intake in the control group increased from 8% to 17% over the ages of 4 months to 2 years. This indicates that children following a protein-restricted diet and aiming for 3 grams per kilogram with the use of a protein substitute have a higher protein and lower fat intake than children of the general population. This is of note because in the paper, Nutrient Intakes in Early Life and Risk of Obesity, they looked at the increasing evidence that environmental factors in the first 1,000 days of life predicted later in health. There is convincing evidence that a higher protein intake before the age of 2 years is associated with increased growth and a higher body mass index, and that a low fat intake in early life is associated with adults being overweight. The association between high protein intake in early life and later obesity may occur through increased growth factors stimulating growth and promoting proliferation of adipocytes. The effect of high protein intake are more apparent in the short term, while the effects of a low-fat diet in early life on body composition appear later on. Early low-fat intake is associated with adults being overweight and having a high serum leptin as a result of progressive development of leptin resistance, possibly due to a decreased serum leptin in early life. These are interesting facts to consider, as we need to acknowledge limitations of our current practice to see if and how it can be improved for the health of our patients. Looking at body composition, Evans et al. In the paper, The Relationship Between Dietary Intake Growth and Body Composition in PKU, reported an apparent safe total protein to energy ratio of 3 to 4.5 grams per 100 calories, which is about 12 to 18% of energy. And this has been linked to a more favorable body composition. This safe level is similar to what was reported in the previous study where we looked at the diet compositions of children with PKU that had an intake of protein at 15% of total energy. There is a negative correlation between percent fat mass and total protein intake. And this is important, therefore it is important to maximize natural protein tolerance to promote increased lean body mass in our patients. So in summary, I'd like to just go over the weaning. So during weaning, we aim to achieve normal growth potential, prevent nutrient deficiencies, maintain good metabolic control, aim to introduce the second stage protein substitute by 26 weeks, and make sure that we're aware that we need to provide extra support to families during this transitional time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Camille, for taking the time to present today on low weaning practice for amino acid restricted diets. I thought it was a fantastic presentation with some great insights into the low weaning practice. Camille is doing a series of presentations for us, so feel free to take a look at the rest of her presentations on our VitaFlow in association with you VIA platform. Thank you.